People love to say that every birth is magical, but nobody warns you that sometimes the magic doesn't sound the way you expect. I learned that the hard way when my baby came into the world in complete silence. No cry, no signal, nothing. And before anyone could tell me it was normal, everything around me exploded into rushing footsteps, urgent voices, and a fear I didn't even know the human body could feel. It's strange how one missing sound can flip your entire reality upside down. What happened next wasn't just unexpected, it changed everything I believed about strength, motherhood, and miracles. Most people think a cry is just a cry, loud, annoying, even funny sometimes. But when you don't hear it, that silence becomes a monster that follows you everywhere. I wish someone had told me how heavy silence can be, how it crawls into your chest and refuses to leave. I didn't know it yet, but that moment would trigger a journey I never imagined taking. A journey filled with machines, monitors, fear, and tiny sparks of hope that came out of nowhere. And trust me, nothing about this story goes the way people expect. If you've ever felt like life ripped the script out of your hands and made you improvise on the spot, then you'll understand exactly what I'm about to share. Because this isn't just about a birth. This is about a fight, a transformation, and a twist no doctor prepared me for. And the best part? What starts in silence doesn't stay in silence for long. Not when life decides to write a different ending. I still remember the delivery room feeling like a mix of chaos and magic. That kind of moment when you're breathing fast but pretending you're totally fine. Everything happened so quickly that I barely had time to blink before they told me, "It's time." My heart was racing, not just from the pain, but from the wait to finally hear that first cry everyone talks about. You know, that sound that's supposed to burst into the air like a tiny announcement of life. But when I leaned forward, holding my breath, nothing. And then, nothing. Not a single sound. It was like the whole room suddenly fell into a strange, surreal silence I didn't sign up for. I kept staring at the doctors, waiting for someone to laugh and say, "Just kidding, here it comes." But no one did. And that silence hit me harder than any contraction. Deep down, I felt something shifting, like the world had paused just to test my heart. I kept thinking, isn't he supposed to cry by now? The seconds stretched in a way that made them feel unfair, like time itself was being dramatic. My partner squeezed my hand, but I barely noticed because I was too busy listening for a sound that never came. The silence had weight, a strange kind of weight that pressed into my chest. And right there, as everything hung in the air, I felt the shift into what came next. That silence stretched too long, everything around me snapped into fast forward. Doctors and nurses rushed toward the baby with the kind of urgency that makes your stomach drop instantly. Their voices overlapped, quick, focused, nothing like the calm tone they had just minutes earlier. I could see their hands moving fast, checking, adjusting, doing things I didn't understand. And even though no one said it out loud, the room suddenly felt like a race against something invisible. I remember asking, "Why isn't he crying? Is he okay?" But my voice barely came out. Someone answered with a gentle, professional tone, explaining that some babies don't cry right away for various reasons: fluid in the lungs, breathing difficulty, or just needing stimulation. But honestly, those words slid right past me because fear had already taken the front seat. Watching their serious faces told me more than their explanation ever could. It felt like my heart was learning how to panic in slow motion. Every second, the medical team worked with this sharp determination that felt both comforting and terrifying. I wanted to jump out of the bed and demand answers, but my body wasn't cooperating, and my mind was stuck replaying the silence. I tried to read their expressions, hoping to find even a hint of reassurance, but all I saw were fast moves and focused eyes. And beneath all that, I had no idea what was about to happen next. Before I could even wrap my head around what was happening, they were already moving him toward the doors. The speed at which they took him felt unreal, like someone hit fast forward on a scene I wasn't ready to watch. I kept calling out, "Wait, what's going on?" But the room was too busy to answer me properly. All I saw were the specialists surrounding that tiny body. And then he was gone, just like that, rolling down the hallway toward the NICU. The moment the doors closed behind them, something inside me cracked in a way I still can't fully explain. I felt empty, like my arms were made to hold him but were left completely useless. No mom prepares for that silence, the kind that rings in your ears because your baby was taken before you even touched him. My mind kept trying to make sense of everything, but all I felt was confusion piling on top of fear. It was, without exaggeration, the most painful silence of my life. I kept waiting for someone to come back and tell me he was fine, or breathing, or crying, anything. But time moved slowly, like the world was doing it on purpose just to test my strength. I stared at the hallway door as if sheer willpower could pull it open. My partner tried to reassure me, but my thoughts were already trapped in that NICU room I couldn't see. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of a long, unpredictable road. When they finally let me into the NICU, the first thing I saw was a wave of wires, tubes, and blinking monitors surrounding my tiny baby. It felt like stepping into a different world, one where everything was cold, bright, and strangely quiet. A nurse guided me closer, explaining what each machine was doing, but my mind could barely keep up. All I noticed was how small he looked under all that equipment, and seeing him like that hit me harder than I ever expected. One of the doctors approached with a calm expression, the kind that tries to soften the blow before the words even come. He explained that they were giving him oxygen support and monitoring his breathing closely, trying to stabilize him. They still weren't sure why he hadn't cried, but they had some early theories: temporary respiratory distress, possible fluid, maybe even shock. I nodded, pretending I was absorbing everything, but honestly, my heart was too loud in my chest to hear clearly. I just needed them to say he would be okay. The hardest part was knowing I still couldn't hold him, not even for a second. My hands felt useless, hanging by my sides while every instinct in me screamed to touch him, protect him. I kept thinking how strange it was, becoming a mother, yet not being allowed to mother. I whispered his name, hoping somehow he could hear me through the tubes and tape. And even in that moment, something inside me wondered what the next hours would bring. Those first hours felt like an entire lifetime squeezed into a handful of minutes. I watched the monitors like they were some kind of window into his strength, praying for every tiny rise and fall. The machines made soft beeps that were strangely comforting, even though they also reminded me how fragile everything was. Nurses moved around him with practiced precision, adjusting tubes and checking levels. Meanwhile, I stood there feeling both present and completely powerless at the same time. His condition was critical and unstable, words no parent ever imagines hearing on day one. Every time someone approached his incubator, I held my breath, waiting for signs of change, hoping for good news. The staff kept encouraging me to rest, but how do you rest when your baby is fighting a battle you can't see? My mind kept replaying that silence from the delivery room, the one that still felt like an echo inside my chest. I just wanted to hear any proof that he was truly here. And honestly, one thought kept looping through my mind like a quiet plea. All I wanted was to hear him cry, just once. It's funny how something so simple becomes the biggest wish you've ever had. I kept imagining what that sound would feel like: sharp, loud, alive. It felt like my heart was suspended in the air, waiting for a moment I wasn't sure would come. And somewhere deep in that uncertainty, the next shift in our story was quietly preparing to unfold. I don't know how long I stood there with my hand resting lightly on the edge of the incubator, but eventually instinct took over. I slipped my finger through the tiny opening, just hoping he might feel that I was there. For a second, nothing happened, just the soft hum of machines and my own uneven breathing. Then out of nowhere, his tiny fingers twitched. Just a small movement, but enough to jolt something inside me awake. It was the kind of moment that makes your heart stop and race at the same time. As soon as he moved, the monitor beside him reacted with a gentle shift in rhythm, almost like it was agreeing with me that something had changed. A nurse leaned forward and smiled softly, as if she'd been waiting for that signal too. I couldn't take my eyes off him, this little fighter who had barely made a sound, but somehow managed to speak louder through that tiny gesture. It felt like the first real conversation between us, and honestly, it gave me a hope I didn't know I still had. That one small reaction became everything I clung to. It wasn't a cry, it wasn't a breathy sound, it wasn't anything dramatic, but it was life. Real, undeniable life responding to my touch. My chest felt lighter for the first time since the delivery room, like a window had opened somewhere inside me. And even though I tried not to get ahead of myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was on its way.
It happened so quietly that at first I thought I imagined it. I was leaning over him, whispering the same little words I'd been repeating for hours, when a soft sound brushed the air. It was so faint I wasn't sure if it came from him or from the machines. I held my breath, leaning in closer, terrified I'd miss it again. And then I heard it, a weak, fragile cry, barely a whisper, but real. The second that tiny sound escaped him, the entire room shifted. A nurse turned around instantly, a doctor stepped closer, and for the first time, their faces softened in a way I desperately needed. I felt my eyes fill before I could stop them, because that little cry carried more relief than 1,000 words. It wasn't loud or strong, but it was enough to tell me he was fighting his way back to us, and deep inside something cracked open, this time in the best possible way. One of the doctors looked at me and said, "This is a good sign," and I swear those 5 words felt like a lifeline. I didn't know what the next hours or days would look like, but for the first time, I wasn't drowning in fear. That whisper of a cry felt like the world handing me a tiny piece of hope. It wasn't the beginning or the end, it was just a spark, and that spark was about to grow in ways none of us expected.
The days that followed felt like living on a timeline made of tiny victories. Every morning, I'd walk into the NICU holding my breath, hoping to see even the smallest improvement. Little by little, the tubes started disappearing, like he was slowly reclaiming parts of himself. His breathing became steadier, and the nurses kept pointing out changes I wouldn't have noticed alone. Each update felt like a small celebration in the middle of a battlefield. The first time they told me I could hold him, I froze, not from fear, but from pure disbelief. I'd imagined that moment so many times, but nothing prepared me for the weight of him finally resting in my arms. He was still fragile, still attached to a couple of monitors, but he was warm, real, and mine. I remember whispering hello like we were meeting for the very first time, and in a strange way, we were. As the days passed, I watched him gain tiny bits of weight, enough to make the nurses smile proudly and mark down every change. I started learning his little quirks, the way he curled his toes, the way he calmed when I hummed. Our bond wasn't built through loud moments. It was built through quiet, steady ones that stitched themselves into my heart. And even though we still had a long road ahead, something unexpected was already forming behind the scenes.
The day they told me we could finally take him home didn't feel real at first. I kept asking the nurse, "Are you sure? Today?" Like I was afraid the universe might change its mind. Packing his tiny clothes, disconnecting the last monitors, signing papers, every step felt surreal, almost sacred. After everything we'd lived through, stepping out of the NICU felt like walking into sunlight after weeks underground. My heart didn't know whether to race or melt. When we strapped him into the car seat, he let out a strong, loud cry, nothing like the weak whisper from before. This one was full of life, the kind of sound that echoes in your chest and brings your soul back online. I remember laughing and crying at the same time, because who knew a cry could feel like a blessing? Even the nurse standing by the door chuckled, saying, "Well, he's definitely ready to go home now." And I felt something inside me finally settle. As we walked toward the exit, I held him close, memorizing every sound he made. Every little fuss, every stretch, every breath felt like proof of everything he overcame. And when we stepped outside, I whispered the line that had been hanging in my heart since day one. The cry I didn't hear at birth became the sweetest sound of my life. I didn't know what the next chapter would look like, but after this journey, I knew it was going to be unforgettable. The day they told me we could finally take him home didn't feel real at first. I kept asking the nurse, "Are you sure? Today?" Like I was afraid the universe might change its mind. Packing his tiny clothes, disconnecting the last monitors, signing papers, every step felt surreal, almost sacred. After everything we'd lived through, stepping out of the NICU felt like walking into sunlight after weeks underground. My heart didn't know whether to race or melt. When we strapped him into the car seat, he let out a strong, loud cry, nothing like the weak whisper from before. This one was full of life, the kind of sound that echoes in your chest and brings your soul back online. I remember laughing and crying at the same time, because who knew a cry could feel like a blessing? Even the nurse standing by the door chuckled, saying, "Well, he's definitely ready to go home now," and I felt something inside me finally settle. As we walked toward the exit, I held him close, memorizing every sound he made. Every little fuss, every stretch, every breath felt like proof of everything he overcame. And when we stepped outside, I whispered the line that had been hanging in my heart since day one. The cry I didn't hear at birth became the sweetest sound of my life. I didn't know what the next chapter would look like, but after this journey, I knew it was going to be unforgettable. After hearing this story, I want to leave you with something powerful to carry in your heart. Sometimes the moments that shake us the most are the same ones that reveal what we're truly made of. If a tiny baby can fight his way from silence to strength, what could you overcome if you stopped doubting your own power? Think about it for a moment. How many things in your life feel impossible right now, but maybe just need one small sign of life to begin changing? So let me ask you a few uncomfortable questions, the kind that wakes something up inside you. What fear has been holding you back the way that silence held me that day? What dream have you delayed because you're waiting for the perfect moment that never arrives? And what would happen if today, right now, you decided to fight for your own story the way my son fought for his? If this journey touched you, made you think, or opened your heart even a little, then don't walk away quietly. Leave a comment and tell me, what was the moment that changed everything for you? I'd love to read your story. And of course, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because there's so much more we're going to explore together. Stories, lessons, and truths that might just change the way you see your own life.